Thank you all for being here today. It's a pleasure and an honor to host Professor Tassis today at the EPLO premises. So I'll just say some things in advance on the way we proceed. First, I introduce some things on Professor Tassis' work and research. Then he presents his work. We will receive questions after he finishes the presentation. First from the people who are present, and then questions from the people who have been connected online. I think that the presentation will be around 1 hour, and then we open the discussion for questions and comments and any further remarks you have to make. Thanks again. It is a pleasure to welcome today Professor Chrysanthos D, who holds the position of Associate Professor of Political Science at the Department of Social Administration and Political Science of the Democritus University of Thrace. Professor Tassis is a political scientist whose research focuses on political parties, party systems, political sociology, and the transformation of politics in Greece and Europe, with particular emphasis on social democracy and European integration. He completed his PhD in political science at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, where his doctoral research examined the historical development of PASOK from 1974 to 1996, analyzing the conditions under which it emerged and consolidated itself as a hegemonic political party in post-authoritarian Greece, just after the dictatorship. This work reflects a central and enduring theme in his research, the relationship between social cleavages, party organization, ideology, and political power. A significant part of Professor Tassis' scholarly work explores party change and political moderation, particularly in the context of left-wing and social democratic parties operating under the constraints of European integration and global economic pressures. His research has examined how parties such as the Socialist Party in Greece, PASOK, moved from radical discourse to more moderate and pragmatic policy positions, engaging with broader theoretical debates on dependence theory, cartelization of parties, and intra-party democracy, a very interesting topic. I will come back to that after the presentation. At the European level, Professor Tassis has contributed to the study of transnational party cooperation, especially through his work on the Party of European Socialists, the PES. His research analyzes how European political parties adapt to multi-level governance, the challenges they face in coordinating national interests, and their role in shaping political agendas within the European Union. This work situates Greek politics within a wider comparative and European framework, highlighting both similarities and distinctive national trajectories. He has also published on electoral behavior, political participation, and institutional change, addressing how elections, party competition, and public policies evolve during periods of political and economic crisis, as the one we experience and we still perhaps experience in Greece. His research during the post-2009 period is particularly relevant for understanding the impact of austerity, legitimacy crisis, shifting voter alignments in Southern Europe. In addition to his work in political science, he has collaborated on interdisciplinary research, examining efficiency and performance in public and private organizations, demonstrating a broader interest in governance, policy outcomes, and institutional effectiveness. Overall, Professor Tassis' research offers students a rich analytical framework for understanding contemporary Greek and European politics, combining historical depth, theoretical insight, and empirical analysis, a very difficult and interesting combination. His work is especially valuable for those interested in political parties, social democracy, electoral politics, and the changing nature of political representation in modern democracies. In more recent years, he has expanded his research agenda to include contemporary United States politics, with particular emphasis on the presidency of Donald Trump and its broader implications for democratic institutions, political polarization, and party competition. Approaching US politics through the lenses of political sociology and comparative political analysis, his work examines Trumpism not merely as a personal or electoral phenomenon, but as the outcome of deeper structural transformations within American society, including changing class alignments, cultural cleavages, and the reconfiguration of the Republican Party. Professor Tassis' research on the Trump presidency focuses especially on issues of populism, leadership style, institutional conflict, and the strain placed on liberal democratic norms. By situating Trump within longer-term development in US political history, he highlights continuities as well as ruptures, which is a term very often used in the previous months, in the American political system, offering valuable comparative insights for understanding similar dynamics in Europe. This perspective allows students to move beyond surface-level interpretations and engage critically with the political, social, and ideological foundations of contemporary American politics, which will be the central focus of today's lecture. We are very pleased and honored to have him with us today and look forward to his lecture. Professor Tassis, dear Chrysanthos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Anastasia Marinopoulou for her kind invitation of being here to EPLO. I'm very glad for being here. I have seen a lot of familiar faces, and I'm very glad about that, especially, and I would like to thank Professor Sotiropoulos from University of Athens, and all of you for being here and seated and online. The title of today's presentation is U.S. Politics and Society, the case of Donald Trump. Sorry, it's not working. No, it is. Sorry about that. Okay. Stay No, the mouse. No, oh, the mouse. Okay.
Oh, you use the mouse.
No, yeah. Okay. Because you are also something first and first. Okay. Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, thanks. The basic argument of today's presentation is that Donald Trump is not a random phenomenon because Donald Trump is just the second case in U.S. politics and history that after loses his first term, he managed to get re-elected. The first case was Grover Cleveland of the Democratic Party back in the 19th century. That means that Donald Trump is not a random phenomenon, but has deeper ideological, structural ties and reasons in the American society. Moreover, Donald Trump managed to vote the popular voting during the last elections. This is the first thing. The second is that the role of the party. We live in an era that the political parties seems to be undermined. But from my point of view, the Republican Party is very important in order to understand the dynamics of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump managed to control over the Republican Party. And moreover, the Republican Party reinvented itself as Donald Trump managed to provide the party a dynamic in order to win the presidential elections. As we can see, since the three presidential elections, 2016, 2020, 2024, Donald Trump has managed with red underline managed to increase the popular vote from 62 million to 74 million. That in the European state, European systems, the popular vote is the most important thing for a president to get elected, but not in the United States, because it's the electoral college. But we have to deal with the popular vote in order to provide a nomination for Donald Trump to be more dynamic in his second term in the presidency in comparison to his first presidency. As we can see in the presidential elections 2024, Donald Trump has, with the red color, has managed to win the majority of the states. Donald Trump dynamics is based on ideological, political, and economical factors. In ideology, there is a kind of conservatism in the Republican Party, the neoliberal uprising during 70s and 80s, the Second Cold War by Ronald Reagan, and the emphasis on the individualism since 1990s. And the party politics, there is, especially since 1990s, a convergence of both of the establishment of both parties, Republicans and Democratic parties, based on the third way politics, which leads to the Democratic Party, to the liberal center, political cartelization, as we say in party politics, and the undermining of the role of party on the ground, and emphasis on the mass media, on the primaries, and the super PACs, and therefore, since 2007, the uprising and the establishment of the Tea Party as a basic fraction inside the Republican Party. About the economic policy, there is, since 1960s, a new trend among capitalism about the monopoly capital and multinational cooperation, which leads to the globalization before globalization, because there is a kind of aspect that the globalization started since the collapse of the communist regimes 1989. For me, it's totally mistaken. The globalization process has started since 1960s with the monopoly capital and multinational cooperation, which tried to be not only in one country but to different countries, with the state's abolishment of the tariffs on trade, and therefore there is a negative aspect and negative consequences in the productive situation in the United States, with the deindustrialization of the Rust Belt, and since 1970s, the stock market economy, which led to the increase of inequalities. Therefore, around the Tea Party and around the Donald Trump has been built a social alliance with evangelical Christians, veterans, Silicon Valley, white labor, especially in the Rust Belt, and the rural strata, which provided dynamics and provided all these electoral political dynamics of the Republican Party, especially under the leadership of Donald Trump. And the basic question is, we can see in nowadays, Donald Trump tries to transform not only United States political parts and political system, but he tries to change, to shift the politics in the European Union, because his opponent is not Europe. His opponent is the liberal ideas of Europe. The globalization, the free market, the free trade in economy, and the liberal ideas in life and in politics. And this is how Donald Trump tries to interfere to European politics in order to change the political paradigm in Europe. The basic slogan of Donald Trump, "Make America Great Again," the famous MAGA. It's not Donald Trump's slogan. It's Ronald Reagan's slogan. The 1980s election, "Make America Great Again." The other slogan of Donald Trump is "Forgotten." It's his own slogan for the forgotten. And it's a basic slogan on the Republican Party platform for 2024 elections, dedicated to the forgotten men and women of America. It's not Donald Trump's too. It's referred to Franklin Delano Roosevelt from 1932, which his program was focused on the forgotten men because of the economic crisis of 1929, 1930. This is my basic argument, because Donald Trump tries to present himself as a continuity to protecting the poor people and the people who face the consequences of the economic crisis that hit the United States 2007, 2009, as FDR did, the first thing. And the second is a kind of conservatism that comes from Ronald Reagan and New Alt-Right since the 80s. Which Ronald Reagan's slogan was "Make America Great Again." And in the foreign policy, because we can see how important Donald Trump is nowadays in foreign policy, it's about the art of deal. The art of deal is like Sun Tzu, the art of war, because winning without making a war, because the MAGA, Make America Great Again, is kind of isolationist, and they do not know, they don't want United States to be expanded in global sphere and making wars. As Sun Tzu tries to make a model about winning without making war, Donald Trump tries to do the same with bilateral agreements and just interventions, but without making wars. Sorry. Therefore, the 2024 Republican Party platform, the slogan is "American First" of "Make America Great Again." American First is about Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson in 20th century tried to to set United States as the leading country in united world in order not to have another world war after the First World War. But there was a criticism about that in a kind of a sort of American establishment who supported that America has to be in the side of the America, not outside. Therefore, the first aspect is that the United States has to become isolated. The second element is strong conservatives, protectionism in economy, along with neoliberal in the interior. Therefore, the first thing is the Republican Party has adopted Donald Trump's stance against the establishment of both parties, Democratic Party and Republican Party, because he claimed, and the Republican Party claims, that politicals sold our jobs overseas with unfair trade deals and a blind faith of globalism. Therefore, in the party is against the free market economy and the globalized system because they supported that tariffs should be imposed in order to bring American companies back in order to invest in the United States and decrease the rate of unemployment. The major enemy of Donald Trump is China. As we can see now, the close ties Donald Trump has with Putin. He has to be in a moderation with modus operandi with Russia in order to face the basic enemy of United States in terms of productive nowadays, which is China. In the economy, the party claims that tax cuts should be taken place and unnecessary regulation in order to make space, make profit for further investments. And there is Ronald Reagan's Star Wars, the emphasis in the space, robust manufacturing industry, and American astronauts should go to the moon and Mars, and partnerships with commercial space. And about the defense claims that United States should build an Iron Dome with a missile defense shield. And in this case, we can understand why Donald Trump wants Greenland, because Greenland is, very close to the United States in order the Iron Dome to be built. The conservative facts is about immigration. The basic enemy Donald Trump and Republican Party thinks about America is immigration. They claim that they have to secure the border, especially with Mexico, with the wall, and deportations, stop the migrant invasion, and especially they claim that Joe Biden welcomes all the illegal immigrations in United States, and they made a dangerous and not scientific, for me, correlation between unemployment and immigration, which is totally mistaken. And you can ask me later about that. There is an emphasis of law and order, and the inequalities in the United States is not a kind of structural thing. and therefore there is a kind of police and state should increase instead of working on welfare state politics as policies as health sector or education or housing. And about the education system, he claims that he has to close down the Department of Education, and all the schooling system should transfer to the state, with emphasis in the Christian, evangelical Christian, with Christian doctrine, and the basic rights will be the parental rights and ending the teacher tenureships. This is, that was the basic elements of 2024 platform of the Republican Party. About some elements about U.S. party politics. On the contrary to European party systems, which the basic cleavage is between right and left, that comes from the French Revolution. In United States, there's not such left-right cleavage, because there is no socialist mass party. On the contrary, the Connecticut Compromise, there is a kind of compromise between the larger states and the smaller states. Therefore, with the presidency, next to the president, the Congress is established, and the Congress constituted by two bodies, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives states are represented proportionally to their population, about 435 delegates, and the Senate, each state elects 2 senators, 100 members. The president, and it's a kind of difference to the European party system, is not elected by the popular vote, but is elected by the majority of electoral college, 538, and the majority is about 270. And the popular vote plays no role except for kind of nomination. And the electoral system is first past the post. The candidate with relative or absolute majority managed to take all the states' electors, except 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, which the electoral system is like proportional and not first past the post. A kind of we said about the FDR and how Donald Trump tries to focus his hegemony along with FDR, F. Delaney Roosevelt. Roosevelt managed to build his hegemony with the famous New Deal policies. And his target was to overcome the negative consequences in U.S. society about the economic crisis of 1929. And he managed to build a broad social alliance with labor movement, small landowners, immigrants, minorities, and especially conservatives in the South, which managed to build 2 parties as one, 2 different parties in one party, which was back then the Democratic Party, with a political platform based on regulation, with a basic element, the decrease of unemployment, and among other things, it's about the Glass-Steagall Act, 1933, in order to secure the banks and to divide the investment side of the banks with a commercial side of the banks. The result is that FDR managed to win, and the Democratic Party managed to win 4 consecutive terms from 1932 until 1944. That was the aftermath of 1932 elections with FDR, which built his hegemony all the majority of United States, both in electoral college or in the popular vote, managed to win with a huge landslide. This is the 1933, the Glass-Steagall Act. The Glass-Steagall Act, with its about the Glass, the Senator Carter Glass of Virginia, and the member of House of Representative Henry Steagall of Alabama. Glass-Steagall Act is how the banks should focus to the commercial side only, and to separate the investment sector. Since the Second World War, Democratic Party, which back then was the hegemonic political party, played a crucial role in order for the new United States. In 1947, it was a very important year in global politics, as United States replaced England, replaced the United Kingdom as the hegemonic power in the Western camp. Therefore, the Cold War, the anti-communism was adopted by the Truman Doctrine 1974, March 12 of 1974. And the Republicans vote for that. There is a global division between freedom, that is the Western capitalist world, against the authoritarianism of the Eastern, or political Eastern, and the communist world. With the Marshall Plan, Marshall was a Department of State about in the Truman administrative. Marshall Plan managed to fund all these post-war post-war situation especially in Europe, in order the Western Europe to remain in the Western camp. And that was happened not only with funds, but with the mass production, the Fordism that took place in the early of 20th century has expanded to especially to West European states. In the interior, there was American dream, the middle class and the individual success, with mass consumption labor party, labor movement, and not that was a total different approach in the European side, because Europe was built on the welfare state and the collective consumption commodities. Therefore, in politics, United States managed to influence in the period of between 1974 and 1989, influenced European politics in order to provide kind of liberal democracy, especially in the major states, as West Germany or England or France, with a two-party system, a Christian democracy on one side and social democracy on the other side. But in the Truman Doctrine, which managed to ensure the leading role of the United States in global politics, it has a problem faced a problem in the Democratic Party, because civil rights became the most basic issue in the Democratic Party, which provided a lot of tense intra-party tensions, because the liberal fraction of the party tried to expand the civil rights within the United States, as the conservative and especially the Democrats of the South, they tried to remain the segregation system in the United States, because we have to know that African Americans did not have the right to vote before 1964. Therefore, as Harry Truman abolished racial segregation in military, the conservative or sound Democrats made the split of the party in 1948, and they established a different party, which was called States' Right Democratic Party, or Dixiecrats. As you can see, they managed with presidential candidate Thurmond. They tried and managed to have Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina. They managed to win those states. Therefore, they're kind of, since 1948, the electoral map of the United States has changed, and there are a lot of differences, especially in the South with conservative Democrats who try to influence to the party, the Democratic Party, to remain a segregation party. And as the Democratic Party moved forward from that, they distanced themselves from the party. The most important period about this case was 1960s with JFK and Lyndon Johnson. JFK managed to win surprisingly in the 1960s election process, became president, and not only that, but Harry Byrd, the Democratic from the South, managed to win 15 electors. That means that the split was ongoing, despite the fact that JFK picked Lyndon Johnson for his vice president, because Lyndon Johnson was a Southern old-fashioned politician from Texas, and he was very close and was very traditional politicians who had the maneuver to deal with the Southern Democrats and to persuade them in order to stay in the party. But Harry Byrd, made the split and tried to make this difference more clearly. 1960s, and especially the presidential elections, 1960s, it was critical about the mass mobilization system, as there was the first debate in TV. That was a very crucial thing, and it's believed that the debate in the face of Kennedy played a crucial role in order to win Richard Nixon, because Richard Nixon was sweating and he was pale, and Kennedy was smiling, and despite the fact that everybody understood that Nixon was more qualified in order for the issues about American politics, the face of JFK, who presented as a new hope to a new era in U.S. politics through TV, managed to win over Richard Nixon. That was the case of 1960s. We can see the southern case, and we can see how the Democratic Party, despite the fact that Kennedy win, managed to face difficulties in a lot of states, which under the FDR had electoral and political dynamics. The new frontier about JFK would focus on civil rights and priorities, education and separation with church and state, and combating poverty and preventing a new world war by strengthening United States. The first steps of presidency of JFK was against the USSR, the communist country. But in the end of his presidency and before he was assassinated, he moderated his anti-communist discourse. The vice president who became president after JFK assassination, Lyndon Johnson, adopted a new program that called Great Society. Great Society was a social alliance with urban and rural social strata for eliminating poverty, illiteracy, crime, and disparity in political rights, and against nuclear tests. And the main vehicle was education and cooperation between federal government and state governments. There was, today we hear about Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare and Medicaid were two programs were established under Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. But the civil rights was the key factor of his policy. Because it was the first time that the African Americans managed to have the right to vote. This analysis has an argument. This has an argument because it is very crucial in order to understand the conservatives in the United States about 1964 elections. And this is, I think this is crucial because 1964, there was a shift inside the Republican Party. The Republican Party was very close to the Democratic Party in order to become United States, to become a leading force in the capitalist Western state. And it had a liberal aspect of the politics, but not in 1964, because Barry Goldwater nominated as president, as a candidate of president in order to face Lyndon Johnson. Barry Goldwater was a very conservative one with anti-communism, increasing role of church in favor of segregation, emphasis in the army and the military, and he argued that nuclear weapons should be used in Vietnam at the expense of the welfare state policies. In the aftermath of 1964 elections, with a huge victory of Lyndon Johnson, but for the first time since 19th century, Barry Goldwater have managed to win the South states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and that means a permanent stop of the Southern Democrats, of the compromise of the Democratic Party with the Democrats of the South. Another aspect is during this Barry Goldwater as a president, as a candidate, he had a strong support by Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had considered to be one of the most important speeches in the history of American politics, A Time for Choosing. Ronald Reagan made this speech in 1964 in order to endorse Barry Goldwater for his presidency, Time for Choosing. That means that 1980s as a common element since 1964, because we have to deal that since then the Republican Party has changed. And that is, the map about about 1964 elections and the transformation of the South. Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, the first time since 19th century that Republicans managed to have electoral success. But all this kind of, there was, in politics, there was a kind of approach that since the end of the World War II, the society of United States was characterized by pluralism. It was an open society with low inequalities and with human rights and civil rights. And during 1980s, the American society realized that it's not the case. Therefore, there was a great uprising of the young people of the labor movement during 60s, and all these contradictions and oppositions inside the society. The theory of political parties claim that therefore reflects in the political parties. And in the European case, it is the social labor and social democratic parties and socialist parties who face this challenge. In the US case, it's the Democratic Party which face this challenge. And as a lot of people, especially the young generation, realized that all this kind of pluralism was fake, because it was under the necessities of the Cold War and the antagonism between United States and USSR, because in reality some of elites dominates the society, and all this kind of approach was strengthened by three major events. It was the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, and the assassination of Martin Luther King. This is in politics. In economy, the aftermath of the result of the monopoly capital and the multinational corporation we said in the beginning of this lectureship has a result of the Rust Belt. The industrialization of United States, Illinois, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. And all these, the major industries were gone abroad in order to gain profitability from one side, and therefore there is a kind of unemployed white working class. Therefore, in Democratic Party for 1968 elections, Eugene McCarthy and Robert Kennedy challenged Lyndon Johnson. And not only that, but the assassination of Robert Kennedy made things worse. And even worse that the establishment, and this is, about the establishment of the Democratic Party, will face in the same thing in 2016 elections. Lyndon Johnson managed to impose Hubert Humphrey, and massive rallies outside of the convention took place, which and there was a lot of violence by the army and the police against the riots. Moreover, the Democratic Party adopted a policy based on law and order, which became a more conservative agenda at the expense of the welfare state policies. That is, one of the iconic pictures about the situation outside 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago back then. And this is the Rust Belt. it's the Rust Belt is about Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, part of Maryland, and part of Kentucky, which is all the industrialization process that have been to the United States since 1960s. And it is about today, because all this, in political discourse, considered to become the blue wall. The blue wall was meant that they supported the Democratic Party, but now it supports Donald Trump. That is a kind of change because of the politics that we're going to see. But therefore, the party politics in the 1970s, there was a shift of both parties. Democratic Party has been in a crisis, political and ideological crisis, and managed and adapted a kind of political agenda, not focusing on the traditional working class or labor movement, but emphasis was given on identity politics. In the political sector, there was the role of the party as a mobilization factor was undermined, and TV was increased about the political communication, and therefore the society managed to become outside of the parties, or outsiders of the parties, and the parties focused, and especially the establishment of the parties focused on the TV and the advertisement. And the more technocratic kind of politics. There was in the Democratic Party, there was two losses. From one hand, the radical fraction from 1968, the New Left has abandoned the parties because it had a strong opposition about the Vietnam War, and they tried to focus on the labor movement. And from the other hand, it was the Southern conservatives and the part of the white working class joined the Republican Party. Southern Democrats, because or against the African Americans' right to vote, and they favored private enterprise and minimum federal government intervention. And the white working class, because they considered Vietnam War as a patriotic duty, and they were against their sons and daughters of the spirit of '68. They were against the spirit of '68. Therefore, all the political spectrum has changed, because the practices we see today about the primaries in all politics and in all states, and the technocratic orientation of politics, political marketing, and the diminished role of political party in shaping the political agenda and shaping the elite of the parties were imposed were adopted in U.S. party politics during 1970s. The things or the facts that we face in Europe 20 or 30 years later in the United States have been adopted since 1970s. Moreover, the economic crisis, there are two economic crises during 70s, 1973 and 1971 and 79, sorry, make Democrats more difficult for having a dynamics, because they didn't manage to deal with the crisis with alternative way. You can, if you're interested, you can attend Jimmy Carter Mueller's speech 1979, Jimmy Carter claimed that economic crisis is an invisible enemy, and we can't do anything about that because the enemy is invisible. But the enemy, the economic crisis, is visible. It's about the structural problems of the capitalist economic system and all the problems that, a traditional Democrat had to deal with that. And the Democratic Party chose not to deal with that effectively. Therefore, since there is a period of time from 1968 to 1992 with the political and electoral dominance of the Republicans, with the exception of Jimmy Carter presidency. Okay. And the 1980s, with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was the guy who supported Barry Goldwater, as we've seen before. During 1980s, there was a kind of Second World War. Ronald Reagan had two aspects. In the economy, he supported neoliberalism in the interior and the globalism in the as a main trend in the capitalist economic system. On the other hand, there is a kind of aspect that we didn't pay any attention because there was a huge tension between United States and USSR back then, when I was younger. We missed that Ronald Reagan's political agenda was very conservative, was anti-immigrant, was against abortion, and was very nationalistic, in fact. And therefore, the result was a kind of new old right to be established back then. And the successor of Ronald Reagan, George Bush, was challenged in 1992 by Pat Buchanan, because what Pat Buchanan represented the more conservative faction of the Republican Party. Not only this, but 1995, there is conservative revolution with Gingrich and Buchanan, with less government, tax cuts, balanced budget amendment, and civil justice reforms. Very conservative inside the Republican Party. The communist collapse. That was, a kind of it's the second period in our analysis, because the first was 1947 until 1989. The second period is characterized by the collapse of the communist regimes that lead to a new kind of democracy that the United States tried to impose to the European, especially to the European countries, because the two party systems, the two major parties, Christian Democrats from one hand and Social Democrats from the other hand, has to be converts to the same kind of policies and politics as the two establishments of the political parties in the United States. And that means the Republican establishment and the Democratic establishment removed to the center, to the political center. That was the shift was made by, especially by the Democratic Party in 1992, Bill Clinton, which adopted the third way modernization policies. There is a kind of set of policies: neoliberalism, free movement of capital, abolition of tariffs. That was about the GATT, General Agreement of Tariff and Trades, 1988, has been abolished tariffs in global trade transactions, independent authorities, and abolition of the Glass-Steagall Act, the act that FDR was imposed in 1933 in order to deal with economic crisis. Therefore, during the period between 1999 and 2024, Democratic Party has become the role model for European party system, and especially the European social democracy. And there was, a kind of dispute between Maurice de Verzet and Leonard Epstein. When I was a young researcher about the 1990s, Maurice de Verzet claimed that, SPD, the German Social Democratic Party, will be the role model of the party in the party system, Western party system. But Leonard Epstein claimed that no, it's the Democratic Party that played the most crucial role. Back then, when I read about my PhD, I was thinking that Maurice de Verzet was the right one, but now I think that Leonard Epstein has the right way. Third way modernization. Okay, thanks. It's the fall of Berlin Wall, 1989, and third way modernization project is about the Anthony Giddens, the famous sociology, Anthony Giddens, and it is the ideology of third way politics, and the other is beyond left and right. With this beyond left and right gives a theoretical framework for the parties, and especially the Democratic Party and the European Social Democracy, to move closer to the center and to the Republican Party from one hand, and to the European Christian democracy for the other hand. And this is 1999, abolishment of the Glass-Steagall Act by Bill Clinton, which is, a part of modernization project, considered to be part of the modernization project. A political crisis. In order to understand the economic crisis of 2007, we have to deal with the political crisis inside of United States, because there were both parts have become centrist ones and responsible political parties with technocratic orientation. Therefore, do not be involved in politics, and as we know, let the technocrats knows better, and they can ensure your economic prosperity. And therefore, there's a lot of money in advertisement that called super PACs about that. And the people has become from citizen to clients, voter consumers. People consume politics. They're not involved in politics. They do not shape political agenda. They do not take part to politics. This is a kind of difference. It's about a question of democracy. United States is the basic democratic country, the Western camp, and there was questions 2000 presidential elections about democratic procedures in United States, in Florida, in very small margin. George W. Bush Jr. Managed to win Al Gore in a kind of electoral process that's called fiasco, because there are questions about, the nomination, about this election process there, and this is the heart of the problem, because in the kind of most important country in terms of democracy, the questions will be arising about if the elections, the president elections, were fake or not. The economic crisis, 2008. Okay, there is a crisis on Wall Street, Lehman Brothers, and and Goldman Sachs and all the other famous companies for about the real estate issue. And the major answer about this politics was not like FDR, but it's about bailout, because the first step is that the United States crisis did not remain inside the United States, and that is capitalism means, because the countries were very they have very close ties in terms of economy because of the free market, and and there is a kind of cooperation, and therefore if a crisis took place in the United States, there's the expansion in all the in the rest of the world. And the United States government tried to bail out the major banks with billions and billions and billions of dollars. And as you can see, 2010, the unemployment went up. Therefore, there was a huge social deficit in terms of the 2008 economic crisis in US society. And therefore, in this term, Tea Party was established. The Tea Party was the aftermath of the economic crisis with the political crisis. There is a kind of economic inequalities with crisis of the representation. The Tea Party is an intra-party movement within the Republican Party against the establishment, economic protectionism, against globalization with tariffs, with strong influence of church in politics, opposition, very conservative in terms of human rights and immigration, with smaller government, and especially neoliberalism in politics. And Donald Trump, in 2016 primaries, present himself as the representative of the Tea Party political agenda. They managed to win the primary elections with different positions in comparison with the Republican Party, both in 2012 and 2016. As we can see, Donald Trump managed to win to the establishment of the Republican Party. From the other side, in the Democratic Party, there was a kind of a new, a challenge of the establishment of the Democratic Party at the same time too, about Bernie Sanders. Both Trump and Sanders were not members of Republican Democratic Party either, because primaries allow that. And in terms of Donald Trump has this kind of dynamics, is kind of contribution of the Democratic Party, because the stubbornness of the denial of the establishment of the party to give to Bernie Sanders the opportunity to challenge Donald Trump in 2026 elections, resignation of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the chair of the Democratic National Committee, because she admitted undemocratic practice in favor of Hillary Clinton. As in 1968, and we saw about Lyndon Johnson and establishment, the same thing, or about the same thing Democratic Party did in 2016 in order to prevent Bernie Sanders to become the candidate. And he had a lot of possibilities to challenge Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders had a total different political agenda than Hillary Clinton. Okay. And this is, how Democratic Party focus on the establishment and not to give, give opportunity to the people who were not, who faced the inequalities and the of economic crisis in the United States to express themselves through Democratic Party. Therefore, the establishment of the Democratic Party helped Donald Trump in order to win. 2 minutes, but okay. You know, America is two different countries, very, very divided. In Charlottesville, I was there, in fact, in August of 2017. The same day there was riots. The first, the one picture is about neo-Nazis and this kind of two different America, and from the other side, it is kind of people who protested about this kind of stuff. It's a very divided country. And then I'll skip some kind of, okay, about that, sorry about that. About the conclusions, Donald Trump is kind of on the establishment, represented alt-right and the Tea Party. The political crisis in the United States, it's about deficit on representation, deficit in a political express of the people in the United States. Before pre-existed, the political crisis pre-existed to the economic crisis, and the economic crisis led people to detach from the major parties and with huge emotion against the establishment of both parties. The Tea Party is kind of social alliance with evangelical Christians, veterans, unemployed white working class of the Rust Belt, rural strata, and Donald Trump platform focused on anti-immigration, neoliberalism within, conservative, anti-abortion with traditional values, protectionism, international trade, and especially the focus in the national field is against China. Therefore, Donald Trump managed to change the party. The party was opposing Donald Trump, the establishment of the party was opposing Donald Trump to 2016 elections, and J.D. Vance is an example. In 2020, it's the first time in U.S. politics and history that, you know, there was no party platform for the presidential elections. But on the 2024 elections, the Republican Party was adopted Donald Trump views. That means, and this is our question about that, it is a third period that Donald Trump tries to change not only the politics inside the United States, but he tries to change the politics in the Western sphere and especially in the European Union. Donald Trump supported political and with money the movements which are against free market economy, against globalization, that means free trade on the one hand, and the other hand, they're very conservative, anti-abortion, anti-immigration. And that is my final question. Will Donald Trump and the Republican Party and the new Republican Party become a role model for European Union politics? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Tassis, for a very illuminating presentation and a very detailed one as well. We shall first receive questions from the audience here. We'll try to, of course,
write down.
I'll first, if you can, we can skip the presentation. Okay. And we will go to the participants as well who are online. Okay, any questions from the audience here first? Don't be so shy. Please, yes, take the floor. It might be better you have the microphone. Lina, please.
First of all, thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting talk on the history of US electoral politics and intra-party politics and lots of things I was not aware of. I would like to, you did mention a lot of stuff about Lyndon B. Johnson and his landslide win in '64, but what I find most interesting perhaps was how effective the framing back then of Goldwater was as a very dangerous person with Daisy ad, and all this very, I mean, now kind of perhaps then controversial, but now kind of notorious and very influential age of political advertising. And I'm wondering whether you could offer a certain perspective on why Democrats now have kind of failed to do that, even after a 4-year term of Trump, having been dangerous, emboldening those Charlottesville protests, and demonstrations. Why didn't the framing of Donald Trump as a very dangerous candidate kind of succeed when such a campaign was so much more successful in the '60s? Of course, you could argue it was the cultural fragmentation of the Democratic Party in the latest years, but perhaps a different, deeper perspective on that I would be much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Shall we take a first round of questions? Anyone else? Professor Sotiropoulos, please.
Thank you, Professor Tassis, for a very wide-ranging speech. You put things in historical context, which was very useful. I would like to ask you about the forthcoming elections for the House of Representatives in November 2026. In case you follow opinion polls, what you make of them, and I understand one should not trust opinion polls so early before the elections, but could you give us your own view of what could happen regarding the relative strength of the two parties in the House of Representatives? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Papadopoulos, please.
Thank you very much for your very interesting lecture. Very recently, there was a very prominent international law and politics scholar, a Greek one, who said that we should someday build a statue to President Trump. And why did she say that? Because she thought that Trump and his politics and actions have actually unified and united European states. Sweden has plans to join NATO and so on. Denmark, all the actions against Greenland. So my question is, do you agree or disagree with this, what I find controversial statement? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please take the microphone from Iro, please, if you can pass the microphone. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Brian Omusa. The emergence of Donald Trump as a strong person, strong personality, and leader through the American system, changing political cultures, changing the rules. Does that give us reason to rethink American institutions, democratic structures?
Okay. Let's make the first round here, and then we give a second round. Let's allow Professor Tassis to respond to these questions first, and then we go to a second round of questions. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for the very interesting questions. about the role of Democratic Party, and this is the party politics to matter, because Democratic Party left a kind of gap for Donald Trump opportunity in order to gain power, because there is kind of three bodies of the party: part on the ground, part in central office, and part in public office, as we say in political science. And Democratic Party has abandoned the part of the party which is party on the ground. That means that the Democratic Party do not focus on the local branches, do not focus on the local politics. And on the other hand, the evangelical Christians and the Tea Party were focused on this kind of organization. They're doing a very field work about, on the ground. They have close ties with the American society. And this is a kind of a problem not only for Democratic Party, but for the parts of the left throughout Europe. They have, focused their policy in the central office or the state, the party in public office, and they have undermined the party of on the ground. This is, I think, the major problem. Each year I join the Northeastern Political Science Association in the U.S. in a conference, and last year in Philadelphia there was a kind of a talk about in which case should the Democratic Party focus in order to overcome, and the majority said they have to forget about the blue wall, the Rust Belt, and focus on Georgia. And I said, why on earth on Georgia? And they said, because there are kind of a lot of people, middle class and white middle class, who are in favor of the human rights, have gone to Georgia, and then we have to focus on Georgia because we have to change the electoral process in Georgia, and to forget about the working class in the Rust Belt. And this is, the policy of Democratic Party left, a gap about and the opportunity for Donald Trump. In 2016 elections, Hillary Clinton chose not to go to the Rust Belt because they're taking for granted that the working class will vote for the party, but it did not. In fact, they voted for Donald Trump. About Professor Diropoulos, it's an excellent question. All these kind of policies had limitations, and as we saw to the November elections, with especially New York with Mandani, Donald Trump faced a huge electoral loss because Donald Trump claimed to be anti-establishment, but on New York elections supported Cuomo, who was the candidate who was supported by the establishment of Democratic Party. And therefore, Mandani, who was grassroots politics and who was anti-establishment, managed to win both the establishment of the parties. Therefore, I think you're right, because Donald Trump himself has claimed that the most crucial thing in order to continue these policies, the midterm elections in 2026. And I think, Donald Trump faces problem in the interior because his policy about the tariffs and the important goods, it's very good to hear about how mercantilism is a very good economic system, but in fact it is not, because when you impose tariffs, your citizens have to pay more in order to buy these the same amount of goods. Therefore, tariffs do not allow Donald Trump to deal with inflation. Therefore, the prices has gone up. Donald Trump has not, the ability to deal with the prices, and therefore, it's not a good case for Donald Trump in the prospect of 2026 elections. About Professor Papadopoulos, I'm not about. I do not agree about that because in the United States and especially in academia, they claim that okay, it's Trump, 3 more years and then out, and we'll be back to the normality. There's no such thing as normality in capitalism. There's no such thing as normality in politics because Trump maybe will be out, but Trump is here to stay. And if the elites and the working movement and societies do not have, do not adopt a scheme which is alternative to this kind of set of policies, I'm afraid that the situation after Donald Trump will be worse than now. Therefore, I do not agree. And about the time is relevant in politics. It will be a lot of years, nothing could happen, and in the moment that everything changes, I'm afraid that during the Trump era, with the support of the very alt-right movements in Europe and the inability of European elite to become a political unity and not only an economical one, will give power and opportunity to the alt-right in Europe to become power and to be against the European Union. And about the personality of Ronald, about Donald Trump. Of course, in time of crisis, we have seen that the one hand is about the emphasis in authoritarian politics, and Donald Trump is a very nice, has a strong personality, has the a kind of authoritarian, has to deal with authoritarian leaders, that's Erdogan or Putin. He likes them. They like them too. They like him too. But I believe in institutions, and I think that its kind of institutions provide us a democratic framework. Therefore, there are 5 members of the Senate when Donald Trump invaded in Venezuela, that changed their votes, they're Republicans, and said that it's not permitted to do it again. They voted against, and if Donald Trump had the will to make a kind of intervention or invasion, in fact, in another country, has to put this kind of policies throughout the institutions. And for me, this is important. This is about how democracy has to play its role.
Let's go to a second round of questions. Anyone? Evie, please. And then say the name. Evie. Okay, good. Evie, please, first.
Hello. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was extremely enlightening. So actually, I have 2 questions, in which the first one is divided into 2 parts. I'm going to go with the first one. The second one, which is smaller. Do you think that Trump, because you mentioned that he is here to stay, do you believe that he will become the next Putin, Erdogan, etc.? And the other question is, I feel like the North and the South of the United States, patriotically speaking, they are kind of divided. And I mean, what I mean by that is that I feel like the South is much more patriotic and they believe in like pure ethnicity and all of these ideas. And do you believe that this is true? And also, do you believe that this is also the reason why is there so much instability, politically speaking, in the United States? Because according to what I saw and according to what I have studied so far, I don't feel that like there is stability, politically speaking, in the United States, comparing to Europe. I mean, we're not stable too, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for a very informative presentation. I have a question regarding to Canada. We know that Donald Trump, as a president of America, 45% and 47%, they are two absolutely different people. And this recent one, Donald Trump said that he's going to make Canada as 51st state of United States. Do you think it is something realistic or just Trump's dreams?
Good evening. Thank you for your presentation and your answer. I was wondering, because you said that Trump is not against the European Union itself, but against the core ideas of the European Union and the beliefs. I was wondering if that could be the same for China too, or it is just a matter of economic, that he wants to take an economic advantage against China, or is it also an ideological or political situation that is against with? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I would like to add that democracy really collapses suddenly. It erodes gradually through normalization of rule breaking. So the Trump presidency should not be remembered simply as a controversial chapter in the US history. It should be remembered as a warning that democratic institutions are only as strong as the commitment to uphold them. Legal frameworks must be matched by political courage, and democracy is not a permanent achievement, but a daily practice. So now for the European Union, the Trump era is not just an American story. It is a mirror. What we see in it depends on how honestly we are willing to look. So my question now is, can the EU realistically position itself as a global defender of democratic norms in a post-Trump or Trump-influenced world? Thank you.
One question, yes, please.
Good evening and thank you. So there's been a lot of talk in the past few days, few weeks of Trump talking about nationalizing elections, stationing federal agents outside of polling places, et cetera. So I wanted to hear if you have an opinion about, is this a potential breakdown of the democratic system and how you foresee that kind of playing out or what could be done?
Thank you. Thank you so much. However, they're very interesting questions. In fact, I'm very happy about, because our job is for you. Okay, in order to a presentation, I have to make many questions than certainties, and at the end of the day, we have to go to live here with more questions, even for ourselves. And thank you so much about that. You're right about there are a lot of divisions in U.S. society. Traditionally, the South is more conservative. That's why I chose to make this kind of presentation, because a lot of people and a lot of scholars could not realize how the dynamics of politics have changed in the United States, and that's why they changed, because there are kind of cleavages, in political science we use the term of cleavages, political cleavages, and the kind of of the southern United States. The civil rights issue was the most important one, especially in the analysis of VOK. VOK suggested that. On the other hand, there are a lot of other perceptions about that, about the industrialization of the South, which changed this kind of approach. But you're right. It's a kind of more conservative, but in standard terms, because we have to deal that there is kind of United States is not a status in Europe that we don't want to leave. There is kind of a lot of mobility in the United States, and therefore a lot of people can move around from state to state in order to change the perception, have a better opportunities. That's why I mentioned Georgia, because there is a kind of internal immigration in Georgia from social strata which are white and more sophisticated and more educated, and they have opportunity to deal to change Georgia to a more democrat, towards a more stance favored to the Democratic Party, and that is a situation. But you're right, the patriotic movement is all over the United States because of the Tea Party. The Tea Party and the grassroots organization is there every day. There was questions about last year there was a scholar that he claimed that in Pennsylvania when the process for the elections began, we opened 100 office supporting the candidate of the Democratic Party, and the Conservatives has 15 only, but in Pennsylvania Republicans won. And the guy from Greece, I mentioned that because you did that for 2 months only. On the contrary, the Tea Party is been there for everyday politics, for everyday life, and this is how grassroots politics do matter, in fact. And the stability, it's we live in times of instability, but not only in Europe, but United States as well. It is instability because it's not economic instability only. You have to consider, and this is my point of view, I don't mean that I'm right, but this is my perception. It's a political crisis who was before the economic one. The political crisis led to the economic crisis and but economic crisis is a structural matter to issue in the capitalism, but the political elite did not want to see that. And this is one. And the second one, that when the economic crisis hit the US economy, they chose to bail out the banks and not to save the society. Therefore, this kind of crisis everywhere and instability everywhere. Now, about Canada, I've been to Canada in 1984, a long, so long ago, before you're born, in fact. And the worst thing to say to a Canadian people is to tell him, you look like an US citizen. They became mad about that. No, they don't. It's not, it's a joke. It's about a deal because Donald Trump, his practice is based on deals. His practice made statements, maximalistic goals, and in order to gain without making war. And this is a kind of gains about imposing tariffs to Canada, gains in the American economy. This is verbal more than a substantive one, but in fact, these kind of talks constitute the weakness of the political elites of Canada, and also in EU and European Union too. When the first notion about Donald Trump policies was when J.D. Vance was invited to give a speech to European leaders, and he said, there is new sheriff in town, and there was none of them challenged that. They did not even, sing to him. How do you say the song? I didn't see the deputy. I shot the sheriff, like a joke, because there were the leadership of, it's kind of joke, but you have to think about the situation of the European Union. The political crisis is in the European Union too. European Union is not the architecture of European Union is not a very pleasant thing, and the European leaders had the same the aftermath of the political crisis, of the political cartelization, of all this kind of process we said about that. Their technocratic orientation politics. They're not based on, on grassroots. The role of the party of the ground has been diminished. All the political, situation and the political agenda and the production and reproduction of political personnel is not being throughout the society, but to the elites only. And this is a kind of technocratic process and a kind of representation deficit, as we said in politics. And that's why European Union is not an attractive one. And about, you're right about democracy. First of all, I would ask you about China. Answer about China. If you deal with the strategy of 2025 strategy of United States now in November, we'll see that the Donald Trump's approach about the strategy of the United States should be focused in 5 states only. This is United States, Japan, India, China, and India. So therefore, there's no European Union. Donald Trump does not have the approach that the European Union is a vital state. Right. And then it's not, because his approach is that the European, it's like Donald Trump has adopted the doctrine of Monroe Doctrine with the approach of Donald Trump in nowadays, and with Teddy Roosevelt in the 20th century. That means that the Western part of the world, that means Latin America, North America, and European Union belongs to it's a part of the United States security, and cannot become an entity by itself in order to be a peripheral superpower with rights in its backyard. Only five countries only should have the right to become peripheral superpowers, and European Union is not mentioned among them. And for last but not least, I would like to say that I totally agree with you, because Trump is going to leave, in 3 years, because in the presidential elections are not permitted. It's not giving him permission to be a candidate for another term. But Trumpism is here to stay, and if you want, and if you want to be a part in democratic society, you have to deal with democracy's everyday fight about. It's nothing for granted, and we have to deal with democracy and against any form of authoritarianism.
We have one question online, one final one. And if you allow me, I have a question too,
Right.
after I read the one online, which is
Sorry about, okay.
here. If you can please turn off one of the mics, quick, and the other one as well. The other one there is not good. Okay. So Elvin is asking, in Europe, the rise of right-wing parties is observed in light of the migration issues. What are the implications of Trump's presidency and his anti-immigrant policies for the EU's immigration policy, and what consequences might they lead to by the end of his term? By 2028, I have a similar question, Elvin. Thanks very much for asking that. Will it be perhaps the end of his term in 2028? And my question is the responsibility of the Republican Party. There's a vast critique articulating the argument that in the first place, it's the Republican Party for Trump to blame for Trumpism and for the Trump phenomenon. If they had not boosted and accepted and all this idea of Trumpism, it's not society to blame, it's not Biden, it's not previous presidencies, it's initially the Republican Party that bears the responsibility for this whole phenomenon. And this leads me to a secondary question on intra-party democracy, which you didn't mention, Chrysanthos, and I was expecting it with full ears, but that's why I now try to elicit an answer, that it's intra-party democracy or not that allows for candidates and for presidents to designate their politics and their policies. If intra-party democracy functions as a sort of integral opposition, then we might get rid of, I say a very harsh formulation, we might be able to tackle more successfully in the present and perhaps in the future with authoritarian phenomena like Trumpism. Please elaborate more, and we are close to the end of the...
Okay, thank you very much. I forgot, first of all, to answer about the nationalization of elections. This is a kind of, a premise of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump questioned the result of presidential elections of 2020. Therefore, he suggested that elections should be nationalized. And, in the state of Greece, this is taken for granted because it is what it is. But you know, in democracy in the United States, elections are based in their state's authority. It's not a kind of the government, and this is a kind of huge huge change. I don't think it will prevail that, or at least it has to be a lot of riots about that, because it is the culture of and the constitution about that, and the change in the constitution, the amendments is not so easy in the United States because of its political tradition. It's about the how politics have developed in the United States. It's a kind of structural issue about that, and changes the balance between the state and the federal government, which is kind of questions. Now about the Elvin's question, it's you know, in the core of my presentation, I think that this is my argument too, because I believe that we are in the third period of the United States in Europe. The first period was from 1947 until 1989, that the United States promoted a kind of a specific kind of democracy with two-party system, and on the other hand, the second period was from 1989, from the collapse of the communist regimes until today, with two centrist political parties. And the convergence, political, ideological, and structural convergence of the major political parties, as the establishments of both parties in the United States, especially the European social democracy, move towards the center of the political spectrum, adopting a political agenda and political practices as the Christian democracy. Now, and this is, I think this is the third period, and Donald Trump tried to reshape the party politics in Europe too. It tries to support politically and economically those movements who were against the globalized economy, in favor of tariffs from one hand in the economic sector, and ideologically, on the other hand, they are in favor of very conservative ideas and immigration and the abortion, and this is kind of two sets that it's very dangerous, because on one hand there's a kind of protection that we want, a protection in order to go back to a state which is very more protective than the free market economy, the globalized economy, which is wrong in terms of capitalism. It's kind of mercantilism. It's 18th, 17th, and 19th century, this process, which is wrong. And from the other hand, it's not a neoliberal argument and liberal too. It's a neoliberal argument in the inside of the countries, because they want to cut off the taxes and to promote incentives to the rich people in order to invest, from the one hand, and the other hand, a strong conservative feeling which is more popular to the poor people, because it's easier to persuade them that it's kind of the other who is the enemy and not the structural basis of the capitalist system. And this is, I totally agree with your perception. And about the Republican Party, and you're very right about that. About, you know, you have to think that the Republican Party is a public of Abraham Lincoln. It's sorry about I didn't mention, because, but you know, it's already, you know, I had to speak another 3 hours, which will be exhausted, right? And it's not the case. But you're right. The intra-party democracy, it's a huge thing. But I tried with this presentation to focus on how the intra-party life and the party politics has changed since 1970s, because in the since 1970s the party system and the political parties have adopted the primaries. The primaries, they give the opportunity, they provide the opportunity to anyone who's not the member of the party to be a candidate. And Donald Trump was not a member of the Republican Party and was a candidate of the Republican Party. Bernie Sanders on the Democratic Party was not a member of the Democratic Party and was a candidate of the party. There's a case of Michael Bloomberg, 2001. Bloomberg was nominated in both parties. He was candidate in the primaries in the Democratic Party and Republican Party at the same time. And which is, you know, the intra-party life and intra-party politics, as I said, has been diminished because there is the primaries. And now in Greece, we know that, you know, since 2004 with, you know, the project of Georgios Papandreou PASOK has introduced in Greek politics about that, about the primaries. The primaries is not democratic kind of institutions, because the members, the party of the ground, have the notion to promote the political agenda, to promote themselves as a new political elite. But now they have to they have to vote only this right, the vote only for a specific candidate. It's not a kind of democracy. It's a kind of typical democracy, because because democracy means that the people has to deal with politics, has to be involved in politics. And because you involve in politics and you spend time and you spend, you know, and you have the ideas about that, you have the right to be a part of the party in order to shape, you have the right to shape the political agenda of the party, the ideology of the party, the political program of the party, and the other hand, to be decisive in the terms of shape and reshaping the political elite of the party. And this is a kind of, since 1970s in United States and since 1990s in Europe and especially in Greece, it's kind of TV advertisement, the super PACs that define they play the most crucial role in the political agenda and the shape of the political elite too. And this is this is what we call it, democratic deficit, a deficit of the representation.
Thank you very much, Chrysanthos, Professor Tassis, for your presentation, for detailed answers to quite many questions which were difficult and detailed as well. So thanks very much to the audience online as well. This is closure here, and perhaps this is a start for interesting discussions as the one today. Thank you all very much. And here.